And so I went from seeing potential failure everywhere to seeing no failure. It feels amazing, realizing that I have the power to choose. On Stories of Self, we go on journeys into the lives of ourselves and others. We see how stories connect, how they diverge, and how we can create our worlds and solve our problems. This is the real-life remix of storytelling, which is so often stranger than fiction. So come and sit around the fire, chill by the ocean, or get a coffee with me, as I delve into the stories of self that make, break, and remake us. Some stories are dramatic, some are serene, some will magically mirror you, and some will be delightfully different. I'm your host, Katie Reeve Arnold, and this is Stories of Self. So, just a couple of days after I launched the first episode of this podcast, I was flying through the rice fields of Bali on the back of a moto taxi on my way to a writer's morning coffee meetup. Last episode, we looked at the illusion of perfectionism and how to move past it into the freedom to be imperfect, in being fully exactly where you are right now, being perfectly uniquely you. This week I've been dealing with another big challenge in stepping forward and telling my story of self the way I want to tell it. The fear of failure. This comes up in my life in big and small ways, all the time. And one of the really important things I've noticed is that the worst thing about fearing failure is the story I tell myself about it. So back to the moto taxi on the way to the writers group meetup. The warm air was rushing by and we dodged around the traffic. There were cute cafes and ornate villas and fresh vegetable stalls, and coconut palms flew by. And I was living my dream of spending time in Bali exploring and writing. Life was idyllic. Yet I was not on time, through absolutely my own fault and nobody else's. I was actually 5 minutes early for being 1 whole hour late. Because for some reason I had told myself diligently and repeatedly that the group started 1 hour later than it actually did. Who knows why? I have no idea. And by the time I realized, although it was only 15 minutes away, I knew I was going to be an hour late for a 90-minute event. In fact, as I messaged the group with no reply, I thought it might be that no one had come, or they were not there at all, which was obviously a massive jump to the worst case scenario that would completely hold me back from ever leaving the house. And that was a nice one from my brain to really take that one obstacle and make it even bigger. I caught myself. I noticed the amount that the narrative was utterly fictional. And I thought, shall I go? I had been making so much of the issue up. Really, it could all be fine as well. It's 15 minutes away. Even in the worst case scenario, all I actually have to do is turn around and come home, and it would be 30 minutes buzzing around the rice fields in the sunshine on a moped. So out I went into the unknown and into my mistake, and disappointed at myself, into my fear of failure to attend, and underneath all of that, my fear that I would fail to be able to write spontaneously based on the prompts given. This was part of the group. Write for 10 minutes on a word, topic, or sentence given. And my fear was that when the 10 minutes were up and it came to my turn to read, I would fail to have anything to say. And like so many times when we are riddled with thoughts of failure, I shouldn't have worried at all. I arrived to a small group sitting around a cozy upper floor table with the open rice fields view, talking about a poem I already knew and a topic I had written upon previously at a free online workshop I attended back in January. All the anxiety washed away as I relaxed into the group of people, most of whom I didn't know or had only met once before. But it was comfortable. I was comfortable. And I was immediately glad that I'd taken the chance, despite my fears. When the prompt time came, again my nerves rose. But some kind of magic happens when you don't let that giant stop sign and the big red warning lights in your mind actually stop you. When I just step forwards, a space appears, and in that space is peace. That space is actually, I think, what the fear of failure keeps me from. What is this space? Well, I find it to be that elusive flow state, that thing so many of us seek without knowing we do. It is where I am just so involved in the moment that I'm not focused on regrets from the past or fears for the future. That place where I just am, and where that is enough. It's funny to try to describe it. Hopefully we all know it. It is a place I enjoy, but it isn't quite joy I'm feeling there. It is a place I feel safe, but it isn't like anything I have known to be normally thought of as safety. It's not safety in the stable. Instead, it's a safety in the unstable, because in that moment, I've already jumped from the plane and I'm utterly focused upon building my parachute on the way down. And just like that, the 10-minute writing time based upon the prompt is over, and I do have something to read. Something that didn't exist a few minutes ago, that flowed from my mind onto the page, and people like it. And I am warm, delighted, filled with gladness that I didn't let my failure to make it on time become my failure to attend at all. Creativity is a challenging thing. And let's be clear here, I'm not just talking about artistic creativity. I'm using writing as a personal example. But we have opportunities to be creative all over our lives. It may not be classical artistic creative events and activities that we're doing. It may not be writing, but it may. It may be art, it may be playing music, but it may not be those. Instead, it may be the creativity we bring to solving problems or connecting with people, or teaching, or generating new ideas for how to do something, or even generating a whole new something to do. All of these are also creative activities. The thing I have always been afraid of in creating is what, in art, is called the messy middle. The messy middle is the bit where you have started and created some foundation, and now you could stay where it's safe and there's no fear of failure, but nothing will really come out with an expression that is unique or novel. This is generic creativity at that point. It's nice, it ticks all the baseline boxes, but it's not branded deeply with the unique soul of the creator. Or, at that point, you can go all in and let go of dry land and strike out for distant shores, creating a bridge to bring something of you to life. This is risky. Once you put a piece of yourself out there, then if what you put out fails, it feels like you fail too. Except that is just the illusion. It isn't true. Because your creations come from you, but they are not you. They are an expression from one time and one place where you were. Even as you see others encounter it, it is no longer you. You may have put it out there, but you have already grown away from it. A few weeks ago, I felt incredibly excited. I had long wanted to set up a podcast and have my own website and connect with people through my experiences and see what I can bring to the world and their lives. I felt I had finally overcome several years of chronic writer's block in my transition to becoming an author. More on the story of what I'm creating and getting through that block in the future. So I was excited. I thought of a name for my website, and I searched and I bought the domain that best fit and was available. Great. I was really happy. And there was where I stopped for some weeks, because I wasn't sure how to go on. Building a website wasn't my personal field of expertise. I got myself stuck between not knowing how to do it and not knowing how not to do it if I wanted to reach out into the world. The other day, I picked that thread back up again. I set aside a day for basic website creation, and at the end of that day, I was, on paper at least, no further forwards at all. Visibly, absolutely nothing had changed. I still did not have a website up. A past me would have been stressed and hard on myself because of my failure. Then, in my hurt at being a failure, my struggle to hold on to that hurt and self-blame, I would have turned it all round and projected it outwards, making the lives of those around me just as painful. My failure would have become their failure, blaming them and putting the issue upon them. But as much fun as this sounds, sarcasm there, it's really not at all, creating my own nightmare and giving it to others was just part of me trying to keep myself safe, the only way I knew how to. To identify all the ways in which I could possibly fail, and then, like my life was a maths problem, solve for them so they couldn't happen, or so I would have an answer ready if they did. This, of course, isn't possible. There is no way we can assess all the possible ways in which we might fail, nor avoid them, and there is certainly no way we can have fun living while doing so. And perhaps most importantly, there's no way for us to choose and learn and gain and grow and expand if we blanket avoid all potential failure or put others in charge of our failures. And we'll be sucking the fun out of the lives of the others too, weighing them down by giving them all that blame to hold. Actually, if we own it, failure is learning. It is growth. The only way not to fail is not to try. But not to try at all is maybe the only true failure. Where does that fear of failure come from anyway? It's back to our fear of being judged and found to be wrong. So it is heavily tied up with perfectionism and safety. And it's healthy to consider the risk of failure and outcomes of failure. It's very beneficial that we consider the likelihood of making a jump off a wall, or whether we are likely to experience breaking an ankle in doing so. But is it helpful if our fear of getting down leaves us living a limited life atop the wall, never able to get back to the ground and move onwards towards other things? Might it hurt? Yes. Might it not go well? Yes. But will we be able to mitigate for the risks and pick ourselves up and go on, make a new plan, step into a life that's more the one we want to live? Will I, as a person, be expanded just by having tried? Of course, we step into things trying for the best and hoping to avoid failure. But if we do fail, will the outcome be a no and nothing more? Or will it just be a lesson, a redirection, a point to grow and choose from, a stepping stone across part of the river, rather than the one giant bridge we had been hoping to build? And can we remain open to the opportunities that come our way, not only despite our failures, but sometimes because of them? Can we trust the path even as we build it? I read my writing from another prompt at another writers' meeting a few days later. 7 minutes this time, writing on a short phrase. A couple of people couldn't understand what was going on at all. One person had picked up on one half of the story, which was a breakup, and another person had picked up on the other half of the story, which was an accident. No one had been able to gather it all. Was this my failure? Was it theirs? It was neither. It just was. And it was a point to grow from. In hearing them feedback what they had heard and liked and noticing what they had missed, I learned more about how to craft a complex situation and character's circumstances in a short space of time. It wasn't a failure. It was something I learned from that would lean into all I write going forward. And so I went from seeing potential failure everywhere to seeing no failure. It feels amazing, realizing that I have the power to choose how I want to look at potential failure, realizing that I'm not my failures, I'm not an apple I ate yesterday, yet in other ways I am. As these are the things that go into building me going forwards. Equally, I guess, I am not my successes, but that's another story. I'll pop the pieces of writing mentioned here that I wrote based on the prompts into the Instagram page for this podcast. Check them out and see what you think. The Instagram page is storiesofself.info on Instagram. I'll include a couple of prompts of my own and timings. Maybe you fancy having a go and sharing what you create, tagging storiesofself.info on Instagram. The only way to be sure not to fail is not to try. Not to try is not to be who you are. Not to be who you are is maybe the only true failure. So if we don't open ourselves to potential failure, we automatically fail at life. What a paradox. We are all telling our stories, and we are all telling ourselves stories about it all. Are you brave enough to walk with me into hearing, considering, and understanding the stories we tell? Join me next time, where we'll be considering more stories and illusions and stepping into creating the freedom we desire. Every moment, we are who we are choosing to be. You choose. Choose you, because your story matters.